Self-storage demand, hands down, the most important thing. You can be the best self-storage operator in the world and fail in a market that has low demand. This is demand 101. We are throwing out the old way of analyzing demand, and we're looking at how to do it right and quick. This is my formula. Let's walk through it. Here's a list of all the things you are going to look at when looking for a demand. You may remember that everybody says square feet per capita. How much square feet per capita is what I want? Is it 8 feet? Is it 10 feet? Is 15 too much? Is 20 too much? Now, the reality of the situation is a single square foot per capita is not going to tell you that. Instead, we're going to look at these inputs. We're going to look at the relationships between them, because we are going to understand what, first, the market is doing, both the market itself with consumers, but then also the self-storage market, how those two things integrate and where it's going. First, baseline occupancy. It's really hard to hide if there's no demand when you have low occupancy. Obviously, if you go into a market and everybody is 70% full, there is a demand problem. But when everything is full, it makes it a lot harder to truly tell. Now you may say, AJ, if you have 90% occupancy at all of the facilities, 90% means there's demand. Well, let me ask you this. 90% at 50 cents a square foot, or 90% at $1 a square foot, or $2 a square foot a month? Which is it? Which one is high demand? If it's 90% here, well, can it be that? How do you know? And if it's 90% full here and you move it to $1, are you going to drop to 50%? This is why rates are so important to understand demand when it comes to occupancy. What we want to see is this. Let's say you have occupancy like this and rates that are going seasonally like this, and occupancy doesn't move. This shows that pricing in that market and storage in that market are very inelastic. The price is not affecting demand. What we don't want to see is that when rates go up, occupancies start to go down. That shows that the demand up here at 90% is predicated on a low amount. We're testing occupancy with rates and rate history. The next thing that helps us understand if there is enough demand is fill up. You want to find a facility that had been built in the market, and you want to see, is it 1, 2, 3 years or plus to fill that asset up? Now, we just went through a time which is called the COVID bubble, if you guys remember. So our COVID bubble was a crazy time in storage. If you had a market that opened up right in COVID and didn't fill up, that's a big indicator, because everybody was full and everybody was jacking up prices. There was no end to demand. So you also need to be careful about taking it too seriously if they said, well, we opened up in COVID and we filled up in 2 years. We're in a different environment. So take it with a grain of salt, but what you want to see is, did it or not? At the end of the day, over the last 3-4 years, if someone opened up and it took them 3 years to fill up, that should probably be a warning sign to you. Next thing, growth rates. 2 main growth rates that we look at: population and income. Is income rising to get higher rents? And is the overall population growing? So will there be more demand in the future? Now, it doesn't really matter if growth rate's 3% or 1% or even less, closer to 0, as long as we know that there's demand overall here, right? What we're trying to see is if weakness in the market is short-term, long-term, and what the future might hold. Now we get into this, that almighty square feet per capita. It is actually not nearly as important to me as how much there is, but impact. What we're going to do is we're going to tie these two things together, all right? Future supply and square footage. If you have 200,000 square feet on the market, and that equals 10 square feet per capita and someone is building 100,000 square feet, that means you have a 50% increase in supply. What we're trying to understand on the square foot per capita is impact of square feet. If someone builds, is that 100,000 square feet going to fill up? If you said yes, you're guessing. Generally speaking, anything over 20%, I'm going to really start to question. I also want to see with this square feet per capita, historical. How much came on, when did it come on, and how did that work? Once again, so we can see correlation with all of these things. That's what we're looking for. Now to finish this up, and the most important part, products, meaning that all those things that we talked about need to be then broken down to individual products, as I call them, or units. So the individual unit and its role in the market, supply and demand, is just that, individualized. And a lot of people don't understand the importance of this. Meaning that you can have a facility that has low occupancy, but it doesn't have low occupancy overall, just in one of the unit types. Look at one of my facilities, and I'll show you this. So, as you can see, we are 74% occupied. That means we have 20% vacancy. Now, out of that 25% empty units, we can look at how it is broken up. And what you can see is that it's not even. That vacancy is almost solely concentrated in our 10 by 10s. That makes up, as we can see here, 80% of all the vacancy. So if you take that out, our occupancy is actually 90%. When you look at a market and you see a facility that has vacancy, it is very possible that that facility simply overbuilt one type of unit. I bought a facility that was 60% occupied. Out of the unoccupied units, they were all 5x5s. We bought it, we turned all of those units around, we made them into different types of units, we immediately filled up to 90%, and we tripled prices. So each unit having its own supply and demand may make weakness or strength for those units in that market. Look at them individually. Understand what that market demand is telling you. Right here, we can see availability, and more importantly, we can really see right here where we have no demand in the market. We can also see where we have high demand. This is what we're looking for. This will change pricing. So you fix this one thing, and you've taken care of the problem, and you've changed the overall demand in this facility. It can also show you, though, facilities that you think you can get higher occupancy in. Why? Well, this facility's got 80% occupied, but everywhere else is 95. But you're assuming that demand is same overall. It may very well be that that facility has only 3 types of units, and that you can't just fill it up through marketing or doing something else like that, because the demand for those units are not there. Don't get trapped with that. So, understanding your market, understanding how all the inputs of demand work together will tell you about demand overall. Then break it down to the individual products and the customers, what they want, and how that overlays into the market. This is where you find opportunity. You may find certain size units that have high demand, and you can expand, you can build, you can add those, or you can increase prices on those certain types. Self-storage is dynamic. It's changing. It's always changing. Sometimes you see a facility coming in that's being built, and what they're building doesn't even affect you. So don't let that scare you. Make sure you look at each unit as its own thing. That is Demand 101, and those are all my inputs and how you need to analyze demand in the markets. Now, you may say, well, what about overall market demand? What about small markets? What about big markets? What about mid-sized markets? I actually made a video where I broke down growing markets, stagnant markets, the pros, the cons, and strategies. You can check that out right here. Now you know how to analyze demand. Now you can analyze the market. With that, you are going to be so much more confident in your acquisitions, builds. You're going to be more aggressive on your underwriting and get the best product with the best future. Hope this helps everybody.